we have a whole lot of work now that we're setting up because we have the rates in place, we have designs going on. We need somebody serving in the capacity of district engineer. We had an existing contract with Jim Crowley, and so we're looking to extend Jim Crowley's contract through July in order to get these projects moving in the role of district engineer, to provide the oversight, manage consultants who are doing the design, and assist us in making these projects progress in a timely and sequential fashion. So we took this to the Finance Committee and had a recommendation that they accept and vote. So it's here before you today.
I want to say I appreciate, being a member of the Finance Committee, I support this, but I appreciate you keeping the district lean in terms of the number of personnel. I look across the river and look at TUD, and every time they want to have a conversation, they have 3 of their engineers there. And it's a different agency, but we're able to do it real lean. And I really appreciate that. I think Jim Crowley will do a good job for us. I'll make the motion that we accept this.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any public comment on this?
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Who's the public that?
I just want to get that out of the way. Any public comment on this item? If seeing none, the closed public comment, go ahead, Jeff.
I'll talk to you about that in a second. Did we interview any local engineers?
For this role? No.
Yeah.
We had on-call services for several years. Ultimately, Crowley was hired, had been taking the lead on lining up the R&R program. So we found that he had a natural transition in as he developed the program. Ultimately, as we looked at the availability and some of the talents of the couple engineers that we had existing on-call services with it, Jim Crowley seemed to be the most qualified of that group and also the lowest price.
Okay. All right, I just want to make sure that we do go through that list of local. They may not always be qualified, but we certainly should be trying to give as much work to them as possible. So I'm glad we went through that. That's all.
I have a question. Does Jim Crowley stand to get any of the work that he's overseeing? In other words, he's working as our engineer, and he also has a consulting firm. Is there any crossover there to where he has any input and getting work for his agency after doing work for us?
No, he's forgotten the opportunity to get award and his design contracts. He's not part of the pre-selected pool for the R&R program, so he recognized that up front.
Okay, I've always considered that to be a conflict of interest.
So do I.
Absolutely. Okay, we got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. 5E, discussion action regarding fiscal year 2014-2015 budget goals. Jeff Meyer.
Just 1 second.
We're going back to an old projector here.
You know, I was ready to have the transparencies next. This didn't work.
Going retro? Just going retro?
I want to know what happened to our clock. I mean, how am I supposed to know when recess is?
Behind the big screen.
Are you late?
When's recess?
Well, I will be right back.
Yes, we are retro here. What I want to talk about this morning is our fiscal 14-15 budget goals. It's amazing that I started out with big 9 budget goals. These things need to project each year. You learn a little bit more as you go along, and unfortunately, we tend to be in the same position as we were back in 8-9. We have financial concerns. different reasons for some, but the bottom line here is we need to look at ways to approach our future financial situation for the next several years and balance our budget. And it's going to take some difficult work, and it's going to take some hard choices. Your job as a board, by policy and practicality, is you have to adopt a budget that has the annual net income, total revenues, less O&M, debt service, and capital projects greater than or equal to 0. In other words, balanced budget or better. And when we look at that on the operating side, you're talking about operations and maintenance, which is services and supplies, salaries and benefits. You're talking about the debt service that we've incurred over time. You have to service that and make the annual payments. Then we also have to have capital projects. We have capital outlay projects that have been in the utilities department. Those are funded by rates. And we have to have a net zero budget. We have additional funding, and I'll get into that, but in reality, rates should pay for all these services. Now, where are our revenues coming from and what is the forecast? Going back, because we just talked about the debt that we're going to issue regarding the capital R&R program. The revenues from the rate increase, the 5-year plan that you adopted, do not go to the operating budget. They can only go to 2 things: funding the capital R&R program or funding the debt that has been taken out for the capital R&R program. So it's R&R program only. They cannot be used for our operating budget. And this is what we're going to be looking at and talking about now as we move forward. Operating revenues. There's going to be really no appreciable growth in our operating revenues, whether it be our rate revenue, and then we're talking about the base rate revenue from those revenues that are currently in place, where we're talking about property tax revenues, which is the other large portion of our revenues. Hearing from the county, you can expect no significant or appreciable increase in those property tax revenues for this year and possibly upcoming years. We're just not seeing the turnover of properties at higher values that will generate a higher base assessed value that property taxes are associated with. Yes, they can do the 2% increase a year, but that's nominal. We're not expecting any appreciable increase in revenues from new connections. So if you're looking at a graph, you can basically look for the next 3 or 4 years, our rate revenues, our current operating revenues is pretty much flat. The challenge there is what do we do when we have expenditure costs going up? We continue to deal with escalating operating costs. So we have significant increases in energy costs. CPPA just told us we're going to get, was it a 1 cent or 1.6 cent increase per kilowatt hour? That's going to drive our electricity costs up close to $180,000 a year. Even though we have very, very low rates, any increase does affect our bottom line. We're going to be seeing moderate increases in supply and material costs that we're using in daily operations. And we're going to see continued costs associated with the state shifting programmatic costs to local agencies, permitting costs, increased levels of testing, monitoring, and related studies. These tend to be outside our control. We also have projected cost increases for salaries and benefits. The 5-year MOU that was signed for SCIU has 5% cost increases in the last 2 years of that agreement. We're going to see those kick in. Even though there were some offsets in PERS contributions, your salary and benefit costs are going to increase. Benefits, PERS rates are going up. They're looking at increasing the PERS contribution because they're actually changing the way they calculate our contribution. Their PERS board has looked at the smoothing process that they use to take into consideration the ups and downs of the market. That's going to increase costs. They're also looking at the mortality rate. People are living longer, so they're looking at mortality rate adjustments, which will increase the local contributions. So we're looking at costs associated, first cost increases and health insurance costs. Regardless of what you hear about Affordable Care Act, our health insurance costs are going to increase each year.
Can we ask questions as you go along? Or you want us to wait to the end?
I will take your question now.
I'm crystal clear on how that works, but I'm real curious as far as the ramifications associated with it. By establishing the two-tier system, how are we able to attract replacement employees? Are we becoming less viable as somebody that people want to work for?
Great lead into my next bullet point.
Sorry.
That's okay. Well, this is important.
You planted the question.
Yeah, you showed me this last night, remember?
Well, you're right. We've created a two-tiered system in PERS. Now, part of this is in reaction to what state has told us what we need to do. And I'm not going to use the words I'm thinking of, but they were not thinking ahead. They were reactionary in how they addressed the PERS issues. If you have an individual working for an agency, well, let me step back a second. County agencies, water districts, cities, state, all benefit from what could be considered cross-pollination. People moving and taking their skills from one agency to another, because you learn different viewpoints. You take that experience that you have in the past and apply it to your new agency. It's just like people in the private sector moving from job to job to job. They have 401ks and portability. What this new requirements and what we have done in response has created somewhat of a barrier to that, because if you have somebody at a higher PERS benefit looking to come to us at a lower PERS benefit, you've basically created a roadblock and a barrier for that person, and you would have to then say, okay, if I'm that individual, if I'm going to move, what benefits do I get, and is it maybe higher salaries to offset that lower benefit cost? So you've created some barriers to that process. And for those at a lower benefit, they're going to be looking at me, when I talk about retirement benefit, they're going to be looking at saying, you know what, I need to have that lower benefit offset. I want higher wages. And it's going to put pressure in future years to increase those benefits. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just puzzled by that. I thought if I was in PERS in Calaveras County and I was set in PERS, but now you're saying that if now I decide to go to Amador County and work for that county and they've got a second tier, I get moved down to the second tier rather than maintaining that first tier I was at?
Or third tier, or worse.
Or third tier, yeah.
Wow.
Yes, that is correct. Your PERS account is portable. It goes with you.
Right.
If let's say I'm working at an agency that has 2.5% at the age of 60. If I choose to leave that agency and go to another agency that has two tiers, 2.5 at 60 for existing employees, 2% at 60 for new hires, I will then go, and I still have my previous accumulation, but my new rate for any subsequent years with that agency will now be 2% at 60 at a lower tier.
Oh, man.
Same way here. So if you're looking at somebody that has 2.5% at another agency, comes here, I believe the next tier we've created is 2% at 60. Is that correct?
That's correct. Plus they're paying all their costs. It's also a 3-year average. So you basically get a downward slope going. Unless there's another intrinsic reason why they're going to come. It's difficult.
I still think the playing field's relatively level because we're not the only agency looking at the two-tier issue. Every agency in California, whether it's special districts or even general government, has been faced with these increased costs, and so they've all been addressing it. And the last meeting I attended with the local government committee at Aqua, which was last year, just about every agency was moving in that direction. And I think the goal we had set, or we had committed to, was 2% at 60. And people on the committee were were astounded that we were able to get that, and that they wanted to move in that direction as well. So I don't think the movement issue is going to be that critical in a couple of years, because everybody's going to be there.
Yeah, but if you're already existing,
I think it'll be huge for 3 reasons. One is you're not going to be able to afford the salary, the compensation of salary. This is how we got into trouble in the first place, was buying those types of benefits was less expensive than the pressure on the salaries. And so you had a discounted way to get things. For instance, when you contribute to a retirement plan that has all that risk associated with it, spread to somebody else or spread across the pool, you actually get that at a discount as opposed to the pressure on the salaries, when now you suddenly put, the individual has to take on the risk, they suddenly need to have other types of considerations to take on that risk. So ultimately, what's going to happen, unfortunately, because many agencies have done this, but many agencies have not, because for those of us that have seen the cycle before, this cycles back through, it's just a question of time. And what's going to be hard for us is really competing on the salary pressures, because as we saw in the back end of this contract, there's an expectation of those salary pressures to come up as we transfer risk to the individual. And so in a future contract, and where that positions us is going to be an interesting course to navigate.
Yeah, well, that'll make us competitive, but the two-tier system is, I don't think, going to be an issue.
Well, I think it's an issue.
it's a huge issue.
Okay, well, let's see how it plays out, because I don't agree.
Yeah, I can't imagine leaving a really good PERS rate to go to a worse PERS rate. I mean, that, over the life of my retirement, that would be a huge amount of money.
Well, it may very well, but one of the big issues, of course, and I'm introducing a new idea right now, but one of the problems we've had historically, at least in recent history, is the lack of experience in our staff. And if the incentive to stick around for benefits is one of the reasons to stick around, then that's going to be to our advantage. But I see all the other agencies going to these 2, and maybe we'll see triple-tier systems before it's all over, and I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Now, what we refer to that as golden handcuffs.
Yeah, exactly.
Hanging on to people because they see gold at the end. Is that really why you want to keep those people around? And so it's a cycle. We've seen this come and go. And unfortunately, what it takes is clarity of vision and continuity of the board of what you're trying to achieve. As you structure the right recruitment and retention programs, because some agencies get seen as a training, revolving door for training. We heard that espoused over and over. I think the police and fire department wore that one out. You just, every agency we went to, they were all revolving doors. In our arena, we've talked about the graying of our workforce, and we certainly have a fair amount of that within this agency, although we've got some demographic split. It's a matter of making sure that we're able to keep and retain the right people. And that, with those people that have the enhanced benefit program right now, they'll probably stay. Those that don't have the enhanced program, if there's a neighboring agency with a better arrangement, we may feel it's different for them.
Well, for me, this is a spreadsheet problem. It's strictly numbers. If you can run the spreadsheet, you start to recognize, okay, I can afford this if my salary is $140,000. I can't afford it if it's $110,000. And if the people we're trying to hire into, especially management positions, are looking at this in terms of how our salaries are going to look like we're paying too much. Ratepayers are going to think that we're being extravagant with salaries.
And what I've always cautioned people on, it's not what you make, it's what you retain. And in our case, where we have Social Security that we're exposed to here, where a lot of agencies don't, so that's a quick 8%. We've moved to the employees paying their share of the retirement. It's stepped so that the current employees are stepping that out, so that's a good thing. And then ultimately, it's going to be how we address other non-tangibles. We don't have an education benefit, for instance, and we don't put away on top of it. But that's typically the kind of incentive benefit that you get a better than dollar-for-dollar type of return on, and you increase the reasons why people might want to come to work here without having necessarily to spread a benefit throughout And then ultimately, it caters to the kind of person that you want to get there anyway. There's a continuous learner that's going to invest in themselves.
I got a question.
Go ahead, Jen.
How does CCWD come into paying unfunded benefits to a retiree who has, say, 50% time with one system at a higher benefit and the other 50% here at CCWD with a lower benefit? Does the district that they last worked for get stuck for the higher percentage?
It's based on the time with the district. We are only responsible for the time that, in my case, that I spend in the district. So what the actuarials do is look at the number of enrollees per se and say, this is what you expect me at my age and so forth as the benefits moving out. This is what I have to pay. This is what they pay for. When I leave the district, let's say I pick up and decide to go somewhere else. The district, and per se, my numbers go with me. That particular, let's say I work 7 years here. It's only that 7-year time frame that you're basically looking at. If I go to a higher, say 3%, and let's say I go into law enforcement, go 3% at 50. The district here is not responsible for that 3%. So we're not assuming the responsibility and the unfunded liability associated with that higher benefit beyond me working for the district.
This is why you have affordability and why PERS is designed the way it is. Ultimately, the pool takes the risk and flattens the costs out for the agencies because it's so huge. And you got to remember, back a few years ago, where agencies didn't have to contribute at all because they were making so much money. And this whole factor came to light because of the losses that PERS had, and this whole unfunded liability. As we look at the demographic of baby boomers, it's just such a skewed demographic in our population that the actuarial tables just missed it. And that's kind of where we got ourselves to public agencies.
Well, it was also tied to PERS thinking they were going to get a 20% return for it.
Okay, let's get back on track and get this budget process moving forward.
Let me just go a little bit more. Oftentimes, PERS doesn't have the funds, and the districts have to make up the balance. I believe that's correct.
No. And in fact, our liability here, Jeff and Lynn put together a creative approach, and they've taken care of our liability here in a nice fashion. We all have that in place, and that's a really good thing. So, from that perspective, we're much healthier than many agencies.
So we don't have to, then PERS runs the risk of running out of money before they run out of benefits.
In fact, they do. In fact, they do. And that risk is why we pay those guys huge amounts of money to invest money.
We're still, you're talking about unfunded liabilities.
Our unfunded liability, we have the PARS. We have the PARS.
And we're still paying about $900,000 a year on that?
Just less
But
than a
it's,
million.
That's for retiree health.
but it's scheduled to retire at some point in the future, or expected to end at some point in the future. Is that?
We're working towards pre-funding that. Sort of like PERS is working to make sure the funds are available to pay out those benefits. But that's PERS, that's retiree health versus PERS income retirement.
Okay.
Two different animals.
We got a question.
Just a quick.
Can you come to the microphone when you have a question? Thank you.
I'm still confused on the revenues related to new construction and the hookup fees and how that money can be used. As I understand, it's only for system expansion or something and can't be used for employee benefits and general operating overhead, correct?
That is correct.
So it sounds like on the one hand, you're talking about the loss of revenues for that, but then you're talking about the expenses involved in general, so that you seem to be kind of mixing the two and then causing more confusion. And my second is just an observation. It sounds like we're talking the NFL here. I don't know.
Maybe we did cross over a little because we got much more in depth here than Jeff was intending to go. So if I get you back on track, which is we were looking at knowing where our revenues are going to be for 3 years, having it pretty much flat, and working within that cap for our O&M budget, knowing that we have certain increases that are going to happen within that O&M budget, regardless of anything we do. They're previously contracted for. They are driven by energy costs, material costs, and other pieces of the equation. So we're looking at a 3-year projection here and working backwards to where we're at.
That is correct. And for clarification, we're talking about our operating budget that we're really struggling with. We do have a separate CIP, capital improvement program budget, and that, what Mr. Duncan was, I think, kind of referring to, the expansion fees that we get, the capacity fees from new connections. Those capacity fees are put into our expansion fund that are for expansion-related projects. They cannot be used for operating funds for our daily operations. We cannot use those. That money is not available for us for this process. They're set up in those expansion funds. And right now, we don't have any expansion-related projects. However, those funds are accumulated for future projects and also used to pay off debt service from prior issuance of debt to handle the construction of prior infrastructure. And we just covered, we talked about that, and then I'm getting off track here, but that 2004 revenue refunding bond that we refinanced last year, that held a portion of expansion-related debt. That's what we're using some funds to pay off of that. And then the portion of debt associated with the expansion comes from those expansion funds. But those capacity fees cannot be used for our operating funds. Alternately, the increased rate revenue that is dedicated for the capital R&R cannot be used for our operating budget. So we're only looking at a certain set of revenues to be able to pay for our operating budget. And this is what drives our concerns here. Operating costs are going to continue to rise. We know that. Revenues from the 5-year rate plan cannot be used to offset those costs. The current level of rate, property tax, and other revenues are not going to cover our increasing operating costs. So what's the end result? We've got to reduce our operating budget on the expenditure side.
Or we have to grow.
That's a good, there's a conundrum there. The additional, what we're looking at here is probably maybe, if we're talking about just new connections, and we're talking about maybe 20 a year over the next 3 years, that additional rate revenue is not going to put a dent in this.
Clearly, 20, yes.
Yes.
Clearly.
And all growth isn't created equal. So there's growth that's more favorable to us and growth that is less favorable.
And let's talk about it.
Growth-
Which is which?
Well, growth that is typically more dense without having other liabilities of older infrastructure would probably be seen as more favorable to us than growth that might be spread out with very few units per 100 feet of linear pipe. So those types of things play into it.
Well, you know, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I think that's something we always forget. You know, we need more customers. And yeah, sure, not all customers are equal, but, you know, we're totally lagging behind in commercial customers. I mean, we have nowhere near the, you know, the state average of, you know, industrial or commercial customers compared to residential customers. You know, I'd like just to have a little conversation about where we should grow. You know, it's like when I see the the Bronco Winery guys developing thousands of acres, a half mile from the county line. I wonder, is that a customer that we should be courting to develop inside the county line? I mean, even with our agricultural water, I mean, what's our growth potential, non-related to residential development? And I'd just like to, have that discussion, because I think that's something we forget, the fact that customers are our friends, we need more of them. There's some good ones and bad ones, perhaps, but it's never part of our discussion. We don't have a growth plan. We're not causing anything to happen, we're reacting all the time. And I just think we need to be more proactive in our customer base.
This is something I've wanted to bring up for some time, because the philosophy behind it is new to me. I mean, when I first got on the board, the thing that I learned immediately from my colleague Jeff was, it costs what it costs. I paid real close attention to that, and I started looking at things. And from my fire background, I recognized that residential does not pay for itself. The commercial is what carries having public safety. So I looked at our numbers. That's why I really enjoy the finance committee, because I get real in-depth information from the finance. But we have subsidized rates. That's just the reality of it. I don't know the exact number, basically because we have to calculate grants and things into it, but I would guess best case scenario is we're subsidizing all of our rates to the tune of about 25%. It may be as high as 35%, I don't know, but that's my guess. So every new additional customer that we add to CCWD, our subsidy pot gets smaller. This does not work. This is a diminishing returns. We either have to increase revenues that subsidize the rates, or we need to raise the rates to charge what it costs. But the reality is, we can't grow our way out of this process with residential customers. And that's not just our issue, that's the county's issue, that's anyone that is trying to do things on this incremental scale. It does not work. The numbers will not support it. So if we want to continue like this, we only have a couple of choices. But I agree with Jeff, commercial is where it actually occurs. And I think that there's some real potential for that, but I'm looking at our ability as a county to attract commercial, and it's not real good.
Well, but it's dependent on residential development, and that's always the case. But, and I disagree with you in the regards of, we can't, we need more residential customers to sustain a better commercial climate.
Oh,
Let's save this conversation for...
Can we schedule this to,
Sounds like a great workshop.
yeah, exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
We'll bring this matter up in the future. Let's proceed on with the budget talk. Please. Thank you.
Comes down to what are our budget concerns? As our last bullet point, we need to reduce our operating budget. And how are we going to do that? This is our strategy on approaching it. We're going to be creating a 3-year financial plan. To take a look at not only this year, because we can become very myopic if we just focus on this year and try to solve all our problems. We need to look out beyond this upcoming year, because the upcoming years 2 and 3, is where we're going to have increased salary and benefit costs associated with the MOU. So we're going to look at the 3-year plan, map out what our costs are going to be. The goal here is to reduce our operating costs by 21%. We're not going to do that in the first year. We have to look out over the 3-year span and how we're going to accomplish that. We can't do it all at once, but we are going to target to make that our target. And how are we going to do this? We need to find costs, we need to find efficiencies and cost avoidance measures. We need to address labor and material costs. We need to leverage technology and our data that we have available to us to drive decisions that add efficiencies and improve customer service. We need to utilize the tools that we are available to us, but we're going to need to invest the time to be able to extract that data, extract that information, and put it to use. One of the things we're going to map out is, and it's kind of addressed here in the staff report, we need to look at our staffing requirements and how those lay out over the time when we, as Mitch said, we have a graying of some of our staff. We're going to be seeing some retirements between now and the end of this 3-year process. How do we plan for those retirements? How do we reallocate those resources necessary to fill those voids? How do we use the timing of refilling those positions? Because if you don't refill a position right away, obviously you're going to have some salary and benefit savings. We have to lay that map out over the next 3 years, take into account some of those, and maybe we don't necessarily need to fill those positions back at the current level where we can reallocate some resources. Lay that out as a map, lay in what the new costs associated with it. Then we can drill down to what are we going to have to save and maybe some supplies and capital outlay. So it's going to be a long process, but when we go through this process, it's going to be the goal that we're going to, again, have a balanced budget, where revenues equal expenses over the projection over the next 3 years, so that we don't have to continue to rely upon projected future revenues. Our revenues are going to be flat. We're not going to see significant increases. We need to have a solid plan. The budget you're going to adopt is going to be a 1-year plan. But we will be bringing back this 3-year plan, so everybody here, the board included, understands how we're going to get from here to the end of that 3 years. It's going to be obviously brought to the Finance Committee, so they will understand it. Back to the board for the 3-year plan. And the plan that you're going to adopt, the budget you're going to adopt in June, is the first step in that. It's not going to be easy. It truly isn't. When you look at reducing and becoming more lean and efficient, but I think this is what your board has been talking about, becoming efficient and being able to still be able to respond to our customer needs, but also be responsive to our ratepayers, that when you passed your budget, passed the 5-year rate plan, you said, ratepayers, we're not going to be using this money for O&M. We're going to live within our means, and this is what we're going to do to respond to that. Questions?
I know that this is a different way of looking at things for us. We're always, looking at where we could use less paper, how we can use less fuel. I'm wondering if we're approaching that point where we can look in-house at the way we do things and see how we can cut corners and save money. I'm wondering if more conversations with other agencies that have experienced this, that might have some innovative ideas how they were eliminating, instead of having 3 engineers, now they can get away with 2, or if rather than having 5 operators for their system, they've figured out a way to only live with 3. Personnel are our biggest costs associated. How we can eliminate heads is a real big deal. I know that we're doing a real good job doing that, but there may be ways of figuring out how we can live with fewer people.
We could go down to 3 board members.
It'd probably be a lot more efficient, wouldn't it?
Just knock off the ends here.
I assumed it would be a seniority deal.
Director, there's been internal conversations, and the ideas coming from our own employees who know how this system works, who know how to operate it efficiently, can help us provide some of these efficiencies. I think our in-house, we know how our system operates better than anybody from an outside perspective. Yes, we can kind of bring in some ideas, but what works here, what works in other agencies may not necessarily work here because of the way we have our diverse operations in different service areas. But I think we have that expertise in-house to be able to come up with ideas to find these efficiencies. And there have been ongoing discussions, especially when we're looking at this capital R&R program. We're soliciting input from the guys in the field to say, how can we best make this work? And we're getting some great ideas. So I think it's the knowledge base that we have in-house can really meet those expectations and those needs. You're right, a lot of this is going to be driven by how we allocate our resources. About 50% of our budget is salaries and benefits. So there is a need to really look at how are we adequately and strategically staffed. We do have opportunities with retirements coming up to be able to maybe shift some of those responsibilities and maybe not have to fill some of those positions. And that's where we can get some savings over time. And that's some of the strategies we're going to be looking at. But we do have to look at what are the resources necessary to fund our day-to-day operations and how can we best apply them. Look at our processes. Maybe there's a different way of doing some internal processes that could save us time and money. And so that's going to be a key for us.
I bring it around in terms of, if you look at operations and you look at what we've done with SCADA in-house, it has saved us a huge amount of money and personnel. Some of these other agencies that have not embraced the technology, if they would come and spend a day with Bill Purley, they could eliminate 2 or 3 of their staff members just by virtue of adopting this kind of a concept. And it crosses over on a lot of things. I'm just wondering if there's an agency out there that has figured out a way of doing SCADA times 3, and we could eliminate another operator just by virtue of adopting their process. I don't think that there's anybody that's, really, really smart, but they may have developed some techniques that we might be able to utilize.
We're going to be looking at all options to be able to find efficiencies.
Cool.
Ken, we got a public comment behind you, Jeff?
Yeah, these things are something like better late than never, but as a ratepayer, I'd like to applaud what I'm hearing. Should have been done probably a long time ago. The reason I'm retired, the reason my wife got retired, is that most companies started this process 10 years or more seeing the handwriting on the wall. But I applaud you for at least getting started at this point as a ratepayer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further on this? For you?
Just one more slide, just to keep you updated on this process. Budget instructions to the individual departments are going out next week. They need to submit their budget requests to me by the end of March. We're going to use basically the month of April for the general manager and department heads to review their budget requests. And in May, we're going to go to the general manager will submit the proposed budget to the finance committee for initial review. The general manager will then take the proposed budget to your full board beginning in June and adopt the budget by the end of the fiscal year, the last meeting in June, which is required by policy.
You guys are going to be busy.
Yes. Any more questions at this point?
I would just have one more little question. I'm just a ratepayer, and I don't know a hell of a lot about your business per se, but I did run my own business for 25 years, and I don't know any of these meetings you may having. If you want a ratepayer's perspective, you know my email. I would be more than happy to attend and give a little bit of perspective from that standpoint. Okay?
Sir.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No, thank you, Ken.
What I was going to say at this point is our finance committee meetings are always publicly noticed on our website and emailed out, and I can certainly add you to that circulation list for the finance committee. That's all I
Okay.
have.
All right, thank you, Jeff.
And I'll pass the baton back to Mitch.
Okay, this is
Short break.
sure, let's take a break for 5 minutes and be back in session then.
Can't see the clock. You're doing a good job controlling us. Herding cats, isn't it?
Okay, our meeting's back in session. We left off 5E, just finishing 5E. We're on 5F and new business. Discussion action regarding drought preparedness. Mitchell Dion.
Thank you, sir. A week or so ago, as I was laying this out, I had a different message. Sort of. Obviously, the word of drought is, the buzz of choice running around. And this whole idea of drought response, I'd like to submit to you is probably hysteria. What's more important is drought preparation. We really can't do anything about what's already happened. And for us to run around and think that we can do something about it, short of, very selfishly as an agency, I'm not going to miss an opportunity, but the reality is we're not going to modify the impacts of this current drought response. It's here. Fortunately, it will not turn out to be quite as bad as perceived. Ultimately, the U.S. drought monitor still shows us those living on the West Coast for some time to remain into a drought condition, a severe drought condition. That is going to be the condition, the prevailing condition that's out there. It's interesting, in Southern California, it's probably going to get a little bit of relief, which is good for us. They've talked about the zero deliveries. It's because Southern California has really made the investments in the infrastructure. And they needed to. That was good. But the fact is, for 20 years, they've been saying having that ability to go through several dry years is important to them. And they paid a premium, they paid some money. And interesting enough that many of the agencies in particularly Northern California didn't have that resiliency. For an agency like ours, it's certainly not as pronounced, but when you see agencies, large agencies that support the Sacramento area, at the brink of a real crisis, that's pretty scary. You have to wonder what they've been doing. And what they were doing is sitting on themselves and trying not to look out in the future and not address reality. Take a quick look at the reservoir conditions. They all are coming up with that. This is the water supply picture. Unfortunately, you can't tell, but in the case of Folsom is up 27%. It was down to 17% at its lowest. The flows out of Folsom right now are under 200 CFS, so it's almost down to where you can walk across it. So there was pretty low. We have a little bit more water. This is actually the water supply picture from the flood storage picture. But I put this one up here because it gives us Comanche, New Hogan, New Maloney's, and Don Pedro's, and get a better feel for what we're doing locally there. And again, the red line is still the historic mean. And this one is just oriented for flood storage. So if you look
And that's, the red line is date sensitive?
yes.
It's not the average or the end of year?
Date sensitive to
Okay.
the historic average is coming.
That means it can't be above that mark. Or I'm asking the question.
It could be above that mark. It's
If
not.
it was a wet year.
No, that's just the average for that date. That's the average lake level for whenever this was taken.
Okay, well, I don't believe, well, my understanding is that they can't be to 100% capacity until after, was it April 1st?
In this picture, you're exactly right, is because this picture has all to do with flood control. The previous one was water supply. This is when you look at multiple purpose reservoirs. And the only reason I put this one up is because it has our big storage reservoir, the storage reservoirs that best reflect our water condition right here. But you're right, is they have to reserve, in these dams that are primarily operated for flood control or their flood capacity based upon the calendar year.
Yeah, because I can remember a number of years when I worked for East Bay Mud, they had to hold capacities down when they were getting, and do a lot of releases when we got a lot of rain, and then the rain stopped, and then all that water was gone, and you didn't get a replacement for it, but they needed to hold it down because historically, there was always a possibility of getting too much rain and having floods.
Exactly, and that's one of those complexities that gets into the discussion of water rights that people always forget is there are lots of other overlays that play into water rights, such as the flood control and the FERC licensing. The seniority is, of course, the predominant one, but ultimately these other timing issues also play out. But for us, it's not a great year. We got some more rain coming in. Certainly, we're probably not going to be able to move through without having to do much more than some voluntary things within our community. So even though things are better, we should doubt the drought. It's real. It's here. But it's also California. The fact of the matter is we built this system without really paying too much attention to the fluctuations that we normally see. This is a lovely thing. We talk about this average here, this blue, light blue trace, as if it means something. It's a statistical number. It's an average. And all I did was take the odd years, going back about 10, and that's what you see, just a random selection of the odd years going back to see that you see some years are low, some years are high. But this thing that we talk about above and below average, we're never there. This number is normally important to us right here. This 26%. That's pretty much the reflection of the available moisture content within the snowpack on any given year. So 26% is really low. But it's kind of important to notice that this bottom line is 1977 right there. And so we did pop up so that in all likelihood, this will not be the driest water year on record, even though we had the driest calendar year on record that just came out. Similarly, I want to talk a little bit about, you hear about these zero allocations, or 40% allocations and 60% allocations in state water contracts. This is a little bit deceptive, and I again apologize for the quality of the slide, but what's 100%? 100% was never built. The infrastructure was never paid for. It doesn't exist. So these years that they actually got 100%, they got a lot of water up and beyond what was ever bought or paid for. Certainly, these years that are in and around the 60s are more common than not. And in fact, about 80% of the system is probably what was built and probably what the obligation is. But it becomes a deceptive number that they love to say, gee, I'm only getting 40% of my request. Well, yeah, okay. But some years you actually got 100%, and that was 20% above what you ever paid for.
Well, the paid for isn't the issue. The thing that's interesting about that is what's our actual capacity to deliver? I mean, yes, you can get your 100% allocation, but what can they really deliver?
Well,
I mean, when they get that 100% application, are they really using 65% because that's the capacity of the infrastructure?
Well, it depends on how they maintain the infrastructure. They didn't want to pay and so there's almost a $10 billion backlog on the state water project of the infrastructure that was never maintained. So what was available to them years ago, and so it's a good point though, because not only is the physical limitations, and then of course you get the environmental restrictions of the fish and the environmental electric flows that also reduce the capacity, and those are very real for the timing and the deliveries of their system. Sir?
And I would also question whether or not with 100% allocation, they could use the water.
Well, it's a demand issue because if it's been raining that much, they don't need 100%.
Well, it depends on where. And much of the water, once you get into the Met family, you've got replenishment districts. And so they do a fair amount of groundwater recharge in those areas that overlie some good groundwater basins. And so ultimately, Those were some of the kind of conjunctive use strategies to help offer their own programs to give them 3 or 4 or 5 years worth of reach. And so in those years when we actually get this 100% or something greater than 65, 70, because they didn't have to pay for that, it's discounted. And now that's discounted water that actually goes into the replenishment districts and is available for groundwater pumping to carry them through the dry years when they can then collect full price backfill. The strategies are elaborate, they're complex, and they work, but it's not all captured when they can achieve. We didn't get what we asked for in our delivery. We also here just regulate groundwater. So regulate groundwater like surface waters. Certainly there's a lot that has to be done improving groundwater regulations in the state of California. But the fact of the matter is groundwater basins in California are in trouble. The groundwater basins have been historically overdrawn, aren't ever coming back. Once you have subsidence, you can't pump it back up. Those basins are compacting. The basins that have contamination in them, large groundwater basin up around Sacramento area has 3 Superfund sites adjacent to it around it. They can't fill it back up because they'll start transporting the pollutants within that groundwater basin. And who's going to be responsible for that? Southern California down in just outside Rialto area, the aerojet tool has really, just like the Metro Cordova, has really decimated the ability to use the groundwater in that area. So again, while it's nice to think of groundwater as this great bank that's out there, the fact of the matter is the bank is in trouble already. Now there are some Kern County groundwater banks, some others that have a pretty good track record going, a pretty good thing. But also, like your bank account, the banks that hold groundwater, they also take a dividend because groundwater is lost in most of these banks, from anywhere from 5 to 25% per year. And part of the way they collect and pool is the bank will also take a small dividend off the top of that in order to help cover its cost of operation. So again, a gallon, unlike a gallon in to a storage area, groundwater you do lose some to it. Just
I was talking to a water scientist at UC Davis here about 3 weeks ago, asking him some questions, and his topic is groundwater banking. And his studies are showing that they've got to start looking at costs associated with it. He says this is not recharge like everyone thinks it is. He said you recharge, next time you're going to get 80%. The following time you're going to get 55%. The next time you're going to get 30%. The concept that it's some kind of an underground swimming pool that they can fill and drain, he says that's not reality. What it's going to do is stress surface water, because right now that the groundwater is the saving grace for everyone in the ag community.
He's exactly right. The carrying capacity, what it really comes down is the porosity of your soils breaks down each time you hydrate it and dehydrate it. It starts to break down. So your carrying capacity is not going to be sustained in perpetuity. It's certainly an important tool, and we certainly need to have it on the table. But again, one of the things I'm going to go back and time again is, like the drought, there's no silver bullet, and we have to become drought prepared, not drought response. Another misnomer, and this is a pet peeve of mine, is, I sound like an apologist for Southern California. I'm not. But Metropolitan Water has had over 10 million additional people within the basin and never increased their demand. If you look at the real demand in California, 2 water agencies in the Central Valley use more water than all of metropolitan. So water and population, this idea that our population is growing, therefore we need more water demand, is a farce. It really is just a surrogate, and it's not a good surrogate for water planning. The real piece for water planning is the economics and what you're doing in your economic base.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to go for water planning. And you were all over this, Director Davidson, so I'm right back here with you. And it's the economy is based on individuals engaging in activities that produce goods and services. I should have taken that from the chamber. And individuals have water for their health, survival, and lifestyle. And again, I'm not here to pick on agriculture either, but California agriculture is an important part of our economy. It cannot be understated. But we tend to treat it as a sacred cow when it comes to water use. We've got to be careful with that because all of us collectively have to recognize that we're in it together. Our water policy is intertwined with our economic policy, and we cannot tease it out separately. And we can't have sacred cows or set-asides while you're trying to tease out the thread and really get good water policy covered. And this is the problem we have with soundbite policy making that happens in a crisis when you've been running around and said, oh, we've got a drought, so we have to respond. So the kind of drought preparedness that has to come out really has to deal with some key principles. I borrowed these from PPIC, the Public Policy Institute of California. Frankly, they're not much different than some of the stuff that's been out there. So, but ultimately, the key themes are behind these 7 things are really what we have to do to address drought preparedness. And I think we can boil this down to an agency level as well as we look out on how we're going to deal with our own things. So what about CCWD? We have adequate water supplies to meet this year. May end up with a challenging situation in Sheep Ranch, but we may end up with a challenging situation in Sheep Ranch area. Outside that, we're going to be okay. We still need to talk about water conservation, water stewardship as an education and outreach tool. So we're preparing to do that. We've changed that position description of our customer relations manager in order to help us better communicate with the customers on the pertinent issues that go with water conservation. And then ultimately, we've got to pick up the integration of water conservation and stewardship as a leadership role. I think it's incumbent